Hey there, podcast listeners. This episode of JJ Meets World features Chelsey Ewen from the Arts Partnership. She wrote a big article about us for the Fargo Forum, and so we said, well, we'd like to have you on our show. We touch on some great things, geology, we touch on Minot, we touch on being a server, all sorts of really cool things, and I think you're really going to enjoy Chelsey because she does not hold anything back in this conversation. Plus, Tucker and I argue about the best appetizer in the world. All this and more on JJ Meets World.
1, 2, 3, 4. J.J. Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is. He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. J.J. has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirls as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called JJ Meets World.
What do you think is the best appetizer?
Honey barbecue boneless wings with a large side of ranch.
Yeah, but that's not universal, though.
You asked me what is the best appetizer.
I know, but I'm saying what's an appetizer that you know is found on most menus? And so while I don't argue that that's a great appetizer, I don't think it's the best because it's not universal.
So you're saying that for something to be the best, it has to be the most popular?
No, because I'm not even talking about popularity. I'm just talking about having the biggest availability of anything else.
Maybe chips and salsa?
Okay.
Maybe.
Now you're thinking. Okay.
Honey barbecue boneless wings with a large side of ranch, though, is the best appetizer, which was your actual question.
But have you ever had a set of that's bad?
Yeah, that's true. I have.
Yeah, so have I. I was thinking about this today because I was thinking fried cheese is usually a pretty solid across the board.
That's true. Mozzie sticks is probably the most common, I would assume.
Yeah. Even though, because people order mozzarella sticks, and even if it's provolone that's inside there or cheddar cheese curds, fried cheese is without a doubt, I think, the most popular. So not necessarily the best, not your favorite.
Yeah, I wish you hadn't led the question with best because that's a value judgment.
Or, I mean, maybe you just are using the wrong definition of best.
Am I? Really?
Yep. Yeah.
You should.
You're wrong.
Colloquial sense of best.
To me, I think when people think of best, right?
Yeah.
So there can only be one best. There can be a lot of good. There can be a lot of great. But by definition, there can only be one best, right?
I think so.
So whenever you see something that is best and it's not the best, or there's multiple bests, you kind of feel like you're being cheated, or the person doesn't understand what they're asking for.
This has long been the Achilles heel of Best Buy.
That's what I was thinking.
Yep.
Because it's not always.
Nope.
Sometimes other places have buys that are just as equal.
You can't sell Dynex DVD minus R's and call yourself Best Buy. You just can't. The Coaster ratio is off the chart.
There's one of the big box stores has what is it? It's something best or best something or other. That's their store brand.
Okay.
And I remember thinking like, no, they're not. This is the generic version. So if the generic version is the best,
oh, sure.
What does that make?
Well, and something like that it's really what that company has done is they
best quality is what it's called.
Okay, well, then they're contracting with someone else. They're the best quality people. They're not even making that stuff. That's a white label brand, I would assume, is that they're basically finding a company that makes, say, bread, and they're like, okay, well, we want a bunch of bread, but with our logo on it. So, like, when you get the salsa at the grocery stores around town, the Mexican Village salsa, or like there was a Wano salsa for a while because that was white labeled.
Right.
Now the label has a different name on it, but the label looks the same. So people, we could probably have a JJ Meets World salsa if we wanted to, and we wouldn't be salsa makers. We would just be paying for the right to put our logo on it. So that might be what that is.
Can I take just a moment and correct you on something?
Please do.
So you said Mexican Village salsa.
Yeah.
The Mexican Village does not make salsa. They make hot sauce.
I see what you're saying.
Yep. Now I think Village hot sauce is actually more like a salsa, but it's not the Mexican Village. This is one of those things that only bother me because I've had somebody else explain to me in great detail how hot sauce and salsa are different, and confusing the two is testament to, saying like, your mom, she's ugly. You take it to heart.
So I need an education. What is the primary differentiator between a hot sauce and a salsa?
To me, for my understanding, salsa has chunks in it. So it's not diluted down to a liquid. Yep. Whereas hot sauce, while there may be slight chunks of things like tomato left, for the most part, that's just stuff that happened to get by the blades in the food processor.
Okay. So I'm fine with a good salsa. No, nothing against chunky salsa, but I definitely have a preference for the like the liquefied,
the hot sauce.
Yeah, the hot sauce.
And I am in the same boat. And maybe it's because we grew up here in North Dakota, Fargo specifically, that has a Mexican village, and I've always known it is like that's what you eat with chips.
Yep,
is hot sauce.
It is definitely a sauce and not something else.
Not salsa.
Yeah.
Versus when you would go to Juano's, they definitely, pico was something. And I think pico is where there's very little liquid and it's almost entirely chunks.
See, I have an issue with that because I'm like, there should be more liquid here. Like, really, you just diced vegetables up. So it's just a bowl of diced vegetables. It's not a salsa.
Mm-hmm. Like, you could have just taken that out of the freezer in a bird's eye bag and given it to me.
Could have gone to salad makers and bought 4 different things and mixed them together, and that's not salsa. That's just mixed diced veggies.
Which is very convenient, by the way.
Super convenient.
I'm going to let you in on an insider secret. So my dad was one of the owners of Dakota Natural Foods.
Just so you know, as you're letting me in on this, you're letting in a lot of other people, too.
Oh, nobody else listening to this. It's just you and me, pretty much. Maybe like 2 other people listen. So he was part of the company that made Dakota Kid sunflower seeds, a staple of this area for many, many years. Well, at one point, they started processing for other companies. And so sometimes people would say like, oh, this is the best vodka. I love this vodka. It's way better than that vodka. Oh, I like that vodka, but I prefer this vodka. Well, it's very likely that all of these things, especially if you're buying store brands, are all pretty much the same, which is great if you are buying that generic version and saving the $2.50. Now, that's not a universal truth.
Yeah.
It's not the mozzarella stick of facts. It's the honey barbecue boneless wings of snacks, of facts. Mm-hmm. Let's remember to that so I can keep that analogy or metaphor. Is it a metaphor or an analogy?
That's going to be the title of your next TEDx talk.
Yeah. Mozzarella sticks and honey barbecue boneless wings. Universal.
So much of that, too, though, is and I'm repeating the thoughts that I read in The Omnivore's Dilemma recently, which has been a book I've been talking about a lot. And a large focus of the book is about how we are now part of a food chain where if you ask someone, hey, where did you get that burger from? They'll say, oh, from the grocery store. Well, where does food come from? Well, it comes from grocery stores because that's how we're used to dealing with it. We look for a label that we like and we go with it, and we have really next to no idea. Even if you read the label on the side, you have no real idea where that came from, who grew the parts to it. So we're super disconnected from the sourcing of the food that we eat. And so and that's kind of where advertising really steps in and steps up its game. Because like in the food industry, there's literally only so much salsa someone can eat, right? So you're trying to find other ways to get them to eat your salsa. And if your salsa and that person's salsa are basically the same thing, then you're probably relying on your label and your logo and some message that you're giving about your salsa, and that's what they're going to make their decision on.
I had an idea to buy 2 hot dog carts, and I would set up one hot dog cart on the north end of Broadway and another one on the south end of Broadway. And I would create a fake rivalry between these 2 hot dog carts so people could have brand loyalty. And they said, screw that. The hot dogs at Brady's hot dog cart are the best. Oh, no, you're wrong. The best hot dogs are at the weenie racket up by Dempsey's.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter be, all of the product would come from the same place.
Oh, yeah.
We just split it, at the beginning of the night and keep it at the end because people like to have a brand loyalty.
Yep. Well, when I'm video production background, and back in the day when making DVDs for someone was a thing that people still did, I had to really dive deep into figuring out where these discs were made, because the different brands would often buy from the same factory, and you'd get some savings based off of just buying the right brand. But also certain factories had really crappy production lines. So if you knew that, oh, that brand sources from that factory, I don't want to buy that brand because those discs tend to not work as well as other ones like that. But I have not really applied that same level of scrutiny to anything else. I really should apply it to my food. I really should apply it to my food.
I just took a course called Barbecue Boot Camp up at NDSU. Their meat science department puts it on. And so it's a one-night class that culminates in a feast. And so what you do is you go through 4 stations. Station number 1, in the order I took that, is a guy wheeled out, or I guess it's hanging, a full side of beef that's already been cleaned and everything like that. And so he shows you, like, this is where this chunk of meat comes from. This is where this chunk of meat comes from. And then he butchers that in front of you. And he says, all right, now here's a tip. When they're cutting the meat that the ribeye is here, they're actually splitting the whole muscle group together. And there's this top part of the ribeye that is way more flavorful, super tasty, and the odds are you won't see it in your local butcher shop because the butcher saves it for themselves. Mm-hmm. And so if you go in and you ask for this, that is like, oh, nice. Also, something called a Denver cut is something that sounded delicious.
Yeah.
The next step you go to is they send you to someone who teaches you about actual grilling techniques. So one of the things he said was people who are smoking meats, a common mistake they make is they smoke the meat for the entire cooking time. Well, your meat reacts. It's not alive, but it kind of is because there's enzymes in it.
Yep.
And after 2 to 3 hours of smoke, it's not going to actually take in any more of the smoke flavor. At that point, it is just cooking. So why spend 10 hours feeding applewood into this thing? Just 2 to 3 hours of smoking with the applewood, and then you can move it to another, like, propane or another burn system.
Yeah.
The next one you go into is salts and rubs and marinades, and they teach you all about the fact that there are different enzymes in things like pineapple. So if you're putting teriyaki in something, which has a lot of pineapple in it, it'll affect the flavor in this way. Papaya does this. Salt, pepper, crack. If you have peppercorns...
Crack?
Like crack. Well, I was going to say cracked pepper, but crack would also greatly affect the taste.
Sorry, I became a 13-year-old for a second.
Yeah,
I had to yell that out.
Yeah. Like pork butt. But. So cracked pepper, when you crack a peppercorn open, there's oil inside of it. And so one of the reasons people like fresh cracked pepper is by the time you get it and you've already, it's been cracked for months by the time you purchase it in the store.
Oil's all gone.
It's all gone. And so it still has flavor, but the flavor can be much more intense if you have a fresh cracked pepper.
That's true, too. I mean, anytime you're buying anything from the grocery store, that thing traveled hundreds of miles to get there.
Oh, yeah. Even the butcher segment said, it's not like you're getting meat that was butchered yesterday. You're getting something that was probably aged. I mean, it's probably like a 30-day plus turnaround. And the last thing you do is they brought us into an arena with a live cow. And they let you feel the cow to say, like, this one hasn't really been, fattened up enough. And it was...
Do they make you look the cow in the eyes before you put a bolt in its skull?
Her name was Dory. And I thought... Ooh, by the time the next one of these classes comes around, you're going to be hanging from the rack. You're not going to be here in front of us. But that's the whole point is it's a teaching opportunity for them to say, this is where your meat comes from. These are how these things are, this is how it happens. No one wants to see the sausage get made, but they all want to enjoy it. And then at the end, they have a huge feast where you eat brisket and ribs, and it's so good.
Well, you go to fast food that sells burgers, and the reason it has a particular taste to it is because that company came up with some chemistry that makes it taste that way.
Yeah, it tastes like it was flame broiled.
Yeah, they wouldn't be able to have their service without those chemicals because the way they have to package and send meat out and desterilize it and all sorts of stuff, it wouldn't taste like anything by the time you got it. So they have to reflavor it. A lot of the food that we eat is like that. Like cheese is definitely has a lot of orange added to it. when it didn't have any, just because for some reason that made us want to eat it more. Orange juice is really mostly orange sugar water for the most part, because oranges, I believe, have a low shelf rate, things like that. So we're used to these versions of things. A chicken strip is not what actual chicken tastes like.
Right.
That's what a chicken strip tastes like. And that's just what we're used to. That's what we're used to it coming from. We're used to it appearing in front of us. And if my burger looked like a cow, I would probably have trouble eating it.
Right. Also, when was the last time you saw a cow that looks like how when you draw a cow, white with black spots? It's been a long time since I've seen a cow that looks just like that.
Aren't those milk cows?
I don't know.
Dairy cows?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know. Aren't all cows aren't made the same? Some are for dairy and some are for
cows
eating.
Basically horses that just aren't very fast?
Are cows the honey barbecue boneless wings of the bovine industry, or are they the mozzarella stick? Those are the hard-hitting questions we're going to ask here today. Actually, we don't talk about meat at all during this, do we?
We talk about
Serving.
Grass, how grass grew.
Yes.
And which is eaten by ruminants, so animals that have a rumen like a cow.
Yes.
Which is what you need to be able to digest grass.
And that conversation involves Chelsey Ewen. See, it's easy. You did it right there. You've got to find a correlation between it. Our guest today is Chelsey Ewen, and let's take a moment. We're big time! Those of you who are listening to this podcast the day it is delivered to the web, August 13th, 2018, there's a corresponding story about JJ Meets World in the Fargo Forum today. So you can probably find that in their digital archives if this is 2026. Enjoy that. It's neat. It's a real honor that somebody has took the time to do this. And we said, well, listen, if you're going to interview us for this article, we want to interview you for our show. Mm-hmm. So she got the full experience. We haven't read the article yet, so who knows if she liked the experience
But
or
she
not.
doesn't seem nearly as cynical as you or I, so I have a feeling it's going to be a positive article.
Yeah. Chelsea's a very fun interview because she did not put up any roadblocks for us. She was kind of like an open book, wherever we were going to go with this conversation. And we end up in some really fun spots. We talk a lot about the city of Minot. We talk about Pangea and geology. We talk about communications, getting people ready to go for the future. Yeah. If this were a Venn diagram, there'd be about 1,000 bubbles overlapping each other, getting you to this one point. So sit back, relax, grab a big plate of mozzarella sticks or honey barbecue boneless wings, and enjoy this episode of JJ Meets World with Chelsey Ewen.
JJ Meets World.
So this episode's going to be weird because we just spent an hour with you talking to us and interviewing us. So for us to now turn around and interview you feels awkward and off-putting.
I feel like that's good for you, though, JJ.
It is. Yes. It is. It takes me out of my comfort zone.
You know what happens is we
nice.
got all the nonsense out of the way from us because we talk nonsense a lot.
That's all right. I
So
like nonsense.
Let's start off with this. So Chelsey Ewen, thank you very much for being our guest. And this is exciting because you're working on a piece about the podcast that'll be released the same day that the podcast is. So we're crossing mediums here.
I love it. What'd you call us? A gubernational, media blitz type thing? I don't remember the exact words you said.
I hope I used the word gubernational.
We're going citywide,
boys.
We're mixing peanut butter and jelly in the same jar. So first and foremost, let's introduce the listening audience to yourself. Who are you? What do you do? What do you like?
I am Chelsey Ewen. I am the communications coordinator at the Arts Partnership, which is the umbrella arts organization in Fargo. We're based in Fargo, but we work with artists and arts organizations in Fargo, Moorhead, and West Fargo and the surrounding metro. So my job is basically to amplify the work of area artists and arts organizations, or even just culturally related people and organizations, to help them basically just make people more aware of what they're doing, because there's a lot going on in the arts in our community, which is very great.
And she wasn't even reading that off a card. She had that saved into her brain.
I do say that spiel a lot, yes.
Do you have that saved on your computer so you can just copy and paste it into email sections?
I don't. I do have a bio.
At the beginning of every workday, does Dana have you guys stand up and put your hand over your heart? And there's an APT flag that you have to say that to?
And you're like,
Not
okay,
quite.
everyone recite your job title this morning.
Not quite. No. Fortunately, people always ask me, "Oh, are you an artist?" Which I'm not. I'm creatively inclined, and I have an interest in the arts, of course. But I am a communications professional. I graduated from North Dakota State University with a degree in strategic communication and international studies. So my background is in communications. That's always what I've been intended to do. And I interned with the Arts Partnership as a communications person with Melissa Kosick, and that helped me sort of get my foot in the door for this position. And when Melissa moved on to a new position, and that opened up, Dana encouraged me to apply. And of course, I'm fresh out of college, and I'm like, your description says 5 years. I don't know if I'm even up for it. That it's that weird part of life where you're like, I have a lot of knowledge, but I have no idea where I should take this or who's going to want me. I need to get experience. But fortunately, they hired me in October 2016, and I have worked full-time since then.
You know how you can tell you're a communications major and Tucker and I are not? When you asked Tucker and I for dates earlier, it was, it was fall, maybe? And here you're throwing out October and a year.
I kind of have a weird memory with that type of stuff, though. But it comes in handy in my field because a lot of, what I do, I write for the Fargo Forum. I'm on KFGO radio once a week. I kind of have to, when I go to tell people stories, I have to know that information because a lot of times that's just background knowledge, really. But, it's kind of like, oh, okay, you've worked there for 4 years, not 5. But if I get that fact wrong, then that harms my credibility. So I try to make sure to have those bases covered. And then I'm like, okay, now let's get into the fun stuff.
See, when we get things wrong, that's just par for the course.
Yeah,
it's like,
we
what
have no credibility.
Listening to JJ Meets World, what were you expecting today?
I can't wait for some kid to write us an email saying, I failed a report because I cited JJ Meets World. And your facts about unicorns are grossly misrepresented.
There's got to be some way to sort of strategically sabotage a bunch of kids' reports in different ways. Just like, I don't know. I want to do it somehow.
When I was in second grade, my second grade teacher, who was super old at the time, and even as a kid I knew she was old, yelled at me because I had mentioned that people can get sick from drinking too much water. In this little health class thing she was doing, she goes, and you can never drink too much water. Water is the best thing for people. You'll never be able to drink too much water. And I remembered watching a Dateline where they said you can drink too much water. I mean, really, your body can become drunk from any liquid that you put in there that's too much.
Right,
everything
absolutely.
in moderation.
Yes.
And
I only drink water. I don't drink any other kind of liquid. I'm just kidding.
Really?
No.
No coffee, anything like that?
I'm joking.
So I had to go and sign up. Do you remember signing up? Did you have to do that when you were a kid where you'd put your name like next to the grade book and it was like bad? And if you got a check after it, it meant you were really bad. And 2 checks meant you got a detention.
I never got any checks. I was a goody two shoes my whole life.
Listen.
Because I was scared to get in trouble.
Most of my teachers will tell you right off the bat, like, yeah, that kid was the biggest brown noser ever. We loved having JJ in class. But my second grade teacher, and you know what? I'm going to call her out, Mrs. Christensen.
Uh-oh.
He did not like me for whatever reason. Maybe that's why I became so charismatic, was to show her up. I don't know where she is today. She could be a listener.
Deep-rooted subconscious thing. That's really what led you down the path to where you are now,
True.
right?
It made me the human being I am today.
Did you guys sing Raffi songs second grade?
Yeah, I loved Raffi. Raffi came to NDSU when I was a kid, and you would have thought that the Beatles had come to Fargo. So you're not reacting, so you're not from Fargo.
I am not from Fargo, no. You probably could hear there was like a little cricket in the corner of the room. I grew up in Minot, actually.
Oh, why not Minot?
I could tell you if you have an hour. No, I'm just kidding. It was a great city to grow up in. But I moved away. I went to Minot State my first year of college. I had lived in Minot my whole life, had a great childhood there. And then when I went to Minot State, I just didn't quite feel like I had a true college experience because I was still going to college in the same town where I was born. Like, I feel like it's because I wasn't growing, turns out. So I transferred to NDSU, and that's how I got to Fargo. But so I have no idea who this Mr. or Mrs. Raffi person is, but sounds like they were important.
Didn't know they didn't have Raffi in Minot.
Yeah, that's unfortunate for you. So Raffi was a child singer. Well, not a singer to children.
Is he alive?
Yeah. In fact, he just put out a new album. He was like he just sang great songs. The Fern Gully soundtrack, if you saw that movie as a child, like was a Raffi, I think, produced soundtrack.
Really?
It's raining like
I had no
magic.
idea.
So yeah, it would be like if.
You've kind of lost some credibility because you don't know Raffi.
I'm sorry.
So who did you listen to as a kid? Were you
In
listening
terms
to
of
kids?
Yeah, how did you learn about sharing?
Yeah.
That's a great question. What did I listen to, really? I watched a lot
Told
more
this podcast goes
movies.
everywhere. You watched a lot of movies?
I'm trying to think. Are you thinking like music? What? When I was really little, I can't quite remember what music I necessarily listened to. Oh, I listened to a lot of ABBA.
Really? A lot of ABBA,
Like
huh?
older music, because that's what my parents would listen to.
How much ABBA is there?
Oh,
I
there's
don't-
so much.
There's
There
a
is?
lot.
There's so much.
Okay.
Yes.
So much so that they're working on a third Mamma Mia already.
I know. But like
Got
older,
some leftover
older
ABBA, we gotta use it.
classics, older classics and 90s music. I was a 90s baby. A lot of stuff now that, those that are considered throwbacks, I'm like, oh, yes. It's those types of music that bring you back, make you nostalgic. That's the music I would listen to. But in terms of like who taught me to share, not quite sure if I
Raffi.
have that exact information for you.
So, do you remember, like, was there a children's show that you fondly remember that you've got a lot of nostalgia
I
around?
loved Little Bear.
Okay.
Little Bear and Franklin.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, Tucker and I are a good deal older than you because
Yeah.
those were not things that we consumed. I consumed them, but I also consume children's media all the time because
Right.
I find it to be amazing.
Yes.
I still watch Sesame Street.
Yes, because
Yeah.
it's fantastic and has wonderful messages for people all ages. I agree.
And they've really started making that show accessible to adults. Recently, I saw a bit that made me laugh until I started to cry a little bit. It was called Orange is the New Snack. And it was an Orange is the New Black parody. Oh, it was delightful. And then they had little puppet versions of all of the main cast members. It was
That's
great.
fantastic.
Yeah, so as a kid, you'd have no idea what that is.
And
But
that's-
as an adult, you're like, damn.
That's my favorite part of being, adulting is hard. It's very hard, but the fun part of being an adult is looking back on all those things you used to watch as a kid and finding all those little, not necessarily innuendos, sometimes they're innuendos, but just little jokes. And it's so much funnier to watch as an adult versus a kid.
Oh, I can't believe I was like my parents let me watch Who Framed Roger Rabbit all the time because they're like, it's a cartoon. No, it is not.
So was Ren and Stimpy, and that was not appropriate either.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So before we started talking, I made a mental note during your interview portion of us. So you were a server for a while.
I
huh?
was,
How
yes.
long were you a server?
So I was a server at a restaurant called the Rolling Pin in Minot. It's no longer in operation, but it's a pretty close equivalent to the Shack in Broadway.
Oh,
A family-owned kind of breakfast diner where you get some really good hash browns and really good pancakes and that type of thing.
Kind of a greasy spoon.
Yes,
type.
but just fabulous breakfast food. That's where I was a server. The first time I went to the Shack, actually, I kind of had these flashbacks to when I worked because it's super similar. I had the apron, I had the polo, all that type of stuff. So that was my first and only serving job I've ever had. I worked as a server in high school for about 2 years.
so let's pretend that you're a server and I am a customer and I'm
Okay.
gonna place my order. Okay. So this place specialized like in breakfast food, more or less, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna have the Fat Farmer breakfast, and could I get bacon instead of sausage?
I mean, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so I'd like bacon instead of sausage, and then I want toast, but I also want a side of pancakes. So like if there's like 2 pieces of toast, just give me 1 piece of toast and then 1 pancake.
That's when it gets a little gratuitous, I think. For
Gratuitous,
it's
eh?
a little bit much. It's
But don't
like,
you want some
okay.
gratuity for
I
me?
do. Yes, I wrote all of it down. I tried my best. I did care about the service that I provided, but sometimes I overall kind of life thing I live by is keep it simple. So
Yeah.
when people would make things a lot complicated, it's like you're increasing the risk that this order is going to be wrong just
Yeah.
by having all these little exceptions.
I think one of
but
the best things about being an American is constant access to breakfast food.
I agree.
So any restaurant where you can get eggs and bacon and hash browns and pancakes at any time, that is
so
where it's
that
at.
specific kind of breakfast food then, because other countries do eat breakfast, just different kinds of breakfast.
No, I know, but I doubt there's like a 24-hour frying pan in Uganda.
Definitely.
Where you're gonna get fresh bacon and stuff like that.
There's not that kind of food. I lived in France for 4 months, and they have nothing of the sort for that.
No.
In France, it's an egg, maybe an apple, a croissant, and that's kind of it. Breakfast isn't their main food of the day.
Yeah.
I noticed when you were, I've been to France several times myself, and I noticed that when they knew Americans were going to be eating the breakfast, they would throw more meat options out
Yes.
there. Like you still get the croissant, and you get maybe a cup of like hot chocolate or coffee with
Yep.
it. But then they'll also be like, well, and here's some meats as well for you. But
We
we're
know-
not talking
Yeah.
sausage.
Do you like meat? Vous aimez le carne or whatever it is.
Leveau?
The
Leveau?
meats. So
You want veal for breakfast?
That's for dinner.
what I find to be odd is wait staffs will use a common ending phrase to show that the conversation of ordering is over, and I find it to be a lie every single time, which is like, okay, sounds good, and then they'll walk away. Do you really think my order sounds good, or are you just politely saying like, all right, now don't sip that whole Pepsi before I get back. Wait, just tie it down
What would
for
you
a
prefer?
minute.
Sir, this completes the ordering process. I am now going to deliver it to the cooks.
Right, or
You
maybe
prefer that?
maybe I need to throw something else out there to be like, that's my order, and I will see you in 3 minutes.
So JJ has, so this would be interesting then as a server. So JJ and I, going to Applebee's is a very intrinsic part of our friendship. It's just always been a big part of it.
Oh boy.
Half price appetizers, 9 to
Yep.
close.
Yep.
Pretty much got us through 5 years of our lives.
Absolutely.
Like-
Absolutely.
$1 Long Island iced teas
Yep.
too.
Absolutely.
How good is the quality if they're willing to give it away for $1?
It's quantity over quality, I think.
Through his line benders work, JJ ended up meeting people in the industry that told him that at Applebee's specifically, servers are not supposed to let your drink get down to less than half full of your glass. Like that's like the rule that they tell them all to do. And ever since he learned that, JJ like watches the level of his glass, and I can tell
Are
he's
you
getting
that
I can tell
guy?
he's getting upset when either they let it get below, or if they ask me if I want another Pepsi and I say no, and then they bring me one anyways.
My favorite, because I worked at a place with Pepsi, is when people be like, "Can I get a Coke?" And I say, "Is Pepsi okay?" Because like Pepsi's
the
never
answer
okay.
is no, it never is.
If by
Will I
Coke you mean
accept it?
Pepsi, yes, I can get you a
There
Coke.
you go.
So I was infatuated with a woman who was a server at Applebee's for a while, and she taught me a very important lesson, which is do not shake a glass that only has ice in it left. Be like, oh, and I'll have a refill. Click, click,
yeah.
click, 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 click. She's like, you do that again, and I will never speak to you. And so,
Well, that's just, it comes down to respect,
Well, and-
that's one thing that you do learn. And that's why I think that all people should be servers at some point.
This is a stranger bringing food that you didn't watch get prepared.
Exactly.
So you better be on their nice side.
Exactly.
I think the odds of people tampering with food are way less than we give it credit for. But that being said, I also don't want someone to be miserable because they're working with me.
Yeah.
Now, any personality problems I have, I make up for with just enormous tips, like crazy. Because I served for one afternoon. I was helping out at a place I was doing marketing for. And at the end of it, my shirt was completely ruined and stained, and I was sweaty. And I'm like, oh my God, people do this for hours. I did it
Yes.
for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
This is ridiculous.
It's hard work. You're on your feet all day. You come home smelling like breakfast food, which is very different from eating breakfast food. It's not nearly as fun to smell like hash browns.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where and how you're smelling the hash browns. You
I
walk into
suppose.
grandma's house and you smell hash browns. Yay. But if you wake up after working and smell hash browns just on you, that's different, I guess, right?
It's just bad.
That must be the kind of job that makes you really appreciate where your career is now.
Absolutely.
Right? Like,
100%.
I worked in the trenches back then, and now I'm doing something where I'm not getting this jerk his Pepsi instead of Coke.
Yes.
Stop looking at me like
Absolutely.
that.
You and I have different styles when it comes to dealing with the service industry.
I just like to be. Why ask me a question if you don't care about the answer? That's my thing. I would never want to waste their time.
I just remember the other day we were at Applebee's. I didn't want another Pepsi. He brings me one anyways, and JJ goes, "He's terrible. He's terrible."
He was. That was the last straw. He had been inattentive all night long, and it drove me nuts because I thought, well, at least just come up and be like, "Hey guys, I'm swamped," and tell me that's the case. I wasn't sitting there being like, "I am parched." But here he comes up and says, "Would you like another Pepsi?" Tucker says no, and then he still goes, pours another Pepsi, brings it back maybe 6 minutes later, and I think you are not managing your time wisely.
Exactly. And that is a huge piece of being a prior server too, is that you do have empathy for servers who you can tell care about providing you quality service but get slammed. That's what happens. I've been there.
Yeah.
I know what it's like. But I also know when you're not trying at all. I don't believe in still not tipping them. I will always tip servers no matter how garbage the service was. But I do get a lot less patient when I can, because now I know, I'm like, I see there's no one in this restaurant and you haven't been to my table yet in 10 minutes. Unacceptable. Mm-hmm. So it's a very interesting place to be when you've been a server because you know how it is, but you also know how it is.
Did you guys have rolled silverware there?
No.
No,
Wait.
So you didn't have to sit and roll silverware into napkins or anything like that?
No.
I noticed that's a pretty common punishment in the food service industry is if you came late or maybe you didn't hustle the way you were supposed to, you would get put on silverware rolling duty. Mm-hmm. That's a very unthankable job.
It was at different Applebee's where the server was like, "Hey guys, sorry, I was just having a smoke break outside. That's why I'm late to your table. I had to have a smoke break, otherwise I was going to kill someone." Like, that was how the conversation started.
Be like,
and it got worse from there.
At least it's authentic, I guess.
"This is blue cheese, but please don't kill me when I ask for ranch." Another thing you mentioned earlier is you like geology.
I love geology.
So tell me about geology.
Well, I should preface before people just turn off the podcast like, "Oh, she's going to talk about dirt." I agree.
They're probably not here anymore anyways. Don't worry about it.
And one guy's like, "Dirt? Crank it up."
That's how I felt about it too. As I mentioned, my secondary major was international studies. So that at NDSU, at least at the time I was there, it's only offered as a secondary major to help globalize your primary major, which for me was public relations. So, which I thought made sense. And I had to take 2 years of language and study abroad and all of that. But I also had to take a list of elective classes. And one of them was historical geology, which I'm like, whatever, this sounds somewhat interesting. And I went and every single day, I'm just glued to this presentation because the professor, whose name I forget right now, at NDSU made it sound so fantastic. It was fascinating to learn about, oh, okay, well, this is dirt, but here's why and how. You start with how the earth forms, first of all, 4.56 billion years ago or whatever, and then you start from there, and then it gives context as to why we are here now and just goes from back. So one fun fact I always share from this class that I learned is that, 40 million years ago, Australia used to be, everything used to be Pangea, of course, and then it all broke up. That affected the climate of the overall world. So at one point, Australia was connected to Antarctica and broke away. When it did that 40 million years ago, that's what caused the poles to form to make it cold at the poles and all the warmth to go to the middle, because previously the entire planet was essentially one big swampland, right? But when Australia broke away and it was just like, "See ya, peace out, I'm done with this," that caused the climates to change and the poles to form, which then led to the evolution of grasses, which led to animals evolving to have to hooved animals. So all these, now that they're
ruminants, basically.
Yeah. So basically all these prey are now out in the open. So they've had to figure out and evolve in order to run away from these predators. But also because grass was formed, that's why we have beer. Mm-hmm. So because Australia broke away, we now have beer, which is the very, very simplistic way of a fun fact that I was like, yes, I mean, that's why everything's here, because that's historical geology. But that's the the conclusion I always enjoy
So your
pointing
professor
out.
got everyone to really perk up and they go like, beer, what?
Exactly. That's
Australian beer,
That's how
Foster's.
That's how he presented it, which made it so much fun to connect things to now and be like, yeah, okay, we have the same ancestors as whales. Why? We have this same vestigial organ. Like it was fascinating. So it was less about just talking about dirt. It was more so all of the animals and just the history of the world, which just fascinated me.
Well, that's good because I imagined a series of petri dishes with like, this is Roman dirt.
No.
You can tell because
This is Roman dirt.
Yeah, this is Roman dirt. You can tell because it's full of sin, and this is Egyptian dirt, and you can tell because there's little scraps of mummies in there.
Not quite.
Not
but
quite.
you do learn because, the difference between why we have white sand is it's because the waves are constantly hitting on that sediment, making these particles super small. It's just like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And the reason for bringing it more local, the reason that we have such beautiful, wonderful farmland in the Red River Valley is because there used to be a huge glacier that basically went all the way down the border of the state and throughout this region. And that then melted, making Lake Agassiz, which was about as deep as the top of the Radisson building. And then that's a lot of that sediment was laid, and that's why we have such fertile farmland. So it's just making those connections of, hey, this is why we have what we have, either locally or around the world. So that's what I learned in that class. And it's just for the sake of knowing it. I like to know things. So it was really great.
Did you ever drive by a construction site and like get out of your car and be like, "You're not digging deep enough.
No,
You haven't hit the layers yet."
that is not that's not my background at all, because you never know what they could hit. Call before you dig. I don't want to be the one to tell them how to do their jobs. Not at all. But it is cool to see layers once people do get kind of deep. I don't know. It's cool.
So something like geology, did you ever think, well, maybe this is where I need to be headed? I mean, it sounds like you're pretty intrigued.
But I see, the thing is, I'm intrigued by like everything. So I did think about it. But then I was like, then I'd have to work in the oil fields probably, which I wasn't interested in. So then, that idea went out the door. But also with this major, I took an elective on linguistics class, which was so fascinating. Have you guys either taken any languages at all ever?
I studied French for 5 years. Yeah.
Oh, nous pouvons parler en français maintenant?
Un peu.
So I've actually gone on record
désolé.
before. I've been on record before saying I actually hate the French language.
Really?
And it's nothing against French people or
No,
anything
not at
like
all.
that at all, actually. And I'm sure I would have a grand old time in France. But any language who says the number one is not on board. Not on board. How many? I want apple? No.
Or un, depends on the gender of the thing.
And is apple is palm?
Pum.
Is that masculine or feminine?
Pum,
Is it
I believe,
un pomme or un
is
pomme?
feminine.
That's always been an interesting concept to me
Pomme
since
de
I don't.
terre.
Pomme de terre, potato.
Potato.
Yeah.
An apple of the earth.
I love that. See, that's the best part about learning languages is then if you can translate them is the most fun. It's so good.
I do like reading up on the history of languages and where they come from. Languages that are related. My family has a very Scottish and Irish background. We're mostly Scottish and Irish. And so I've attempted from time to time to learn some Irish Gaelic words.
Oh, wow.
But the most interesting thing to me was finding out how there are essentially 6 still active Gaelic languages that are split into 2 branches, and the people of the like 3 languages in one branch can kind of understand each other, but they can't understand the other branch. I think that concept is very interesting. Like if there was another country that had a dialect that very, very similar to English, that we would go, oh, I kind of understand what they're saying, but they're saying something different.
Right.
That's really interesting to me.
And that's a lot what this linguistics class was about, was just the evolution of language and how it all stems. I apparently love evolution, which is what we could draw with these
Evolution's
topics.
awesome.
I mean, it's pretty fascinating. But how geography plays a huge role in how languages evolve. Because, they argue that French, Canadian, and American English are actually more similar to how English people and French people spoke a few hundred years ago
Really?
versus now, because they've been in their area evolving, but whereas they spoke it across the ocean, which then set that, so it's just, it's really interesting to learn. And even English itself is a fascinating language. I feel very fortunate to have it as my native language, because I have so much respect for people who learn it as a second or third or fourth language, because it's extremely difficult. It's a melting pot of all these different types of languages. There's French influences. There's, it's German and all these different words in it that come from all these languages. So that's another thing that I'm super interested in. If we want to just talk about all these things I'm interested in.
Languages.
Yes.
I dig it.
Yes, I know. And learning French was
It makes sense
super
that a
hard.
communications major would like languages.
Yeah, and I think that's true, because it's very, a lot of my job in communications is connecting one another, telling stories. Language plays a huge role in that, which when I lived abroad in France was something that was a very hard thing to learn, because when I went over, I only had 2 years in college of French. And I took French classes while I was there, and by the time I left, I was conversationally fluent. If I went back, I think it would all sort of come back to me, kind of like learning an instrument. But I couldn't quite delve deep and form genuine, deep connections and friendships with French people, because I couldn't communicate with them that deeply,
Yeah, you needed this word to correctly tell them an emotion, to convey an emotion, and you couldn't find that. I find that when I listen to some of the conversations I had with French-speaking people when I was visiting friends studying abroad, they were like conversations I have with a 6-year-old.
Right,
Somebody who says, like, I went to the store today and I drink juice. I can handle that.
That's how you learn the language, though. You have to start with those super elementary levels and work from there. You can't just be good at it all of a sudden. It's like I use the analogy of learning an instrument.
Yeah.
You have to start and make those squeaks and that abhorrent violin sound when they first start, though. It sounds so terrible. But eventually you get to that level where it sounds beautiful. You're speaking really, really fluently and conversationally.
Well, you're not just learning pronunciation and words. You have to learn completely different grammatical
Context,
structures.
idioms.
Like different sentences. No, you said a sentence in a completely different grammatical way than you would in Japanese, say.
Well,
which I love listening to people speak Japanese, but their grammar is completely different than ours.
Absolutely.
People also think, well, I speak English, I know it. No, your constant podcast is a new word that was created. There are new words all the time. And so even if, French is your second language, you still need to evolve with French because 35 years ago, no one was using the word computer. And so that word needs to exist. And sometimes they just take the actual word. And so it's like, je suis très fatigué podcast.
Podcast or weekend.
Yes, exactly. Or they take a word like computer and you end up with, was it ordinateur?
Ordinateur, oui.
Yeah. See, we'll get into this.
Ooh.
My French is horrible at this point. The only thing I know is when I went to France, I was told you are not allowed to say "Est-ce que tu parles anglais," which is "Do you speak English?"
Oh, sure.
They said you have to attempt everything, and you're going to meet one of three people. One, the person who's like, "Oh," and will help kind of limp you along and give you an English phrase for something and help you. The other person is the one who does not care one bit, and they're just going to rattle off their language as fast as they can speak it, and you either catch up or you don't. And then the last is the person who does not like the fact that you are butchering their language, and so they're just going to turn off to you immediately as well.
Right.
You know what I think is also interesting, but in a different way, obviously, are basically just invented fictional languages. There are actual people whose jobs it is that's what they do.
Right.
So if you watch a show like Game of Thrones, say, there was a guy whose job it was to create Dothraki. So Dothraki is now a language that has words and a grammatical structure that someone decided. And that did not come out of any sort of evolution of a group, saying that. They were like, oh, I think this would work. Elvish, Klingon, things like that.
The Sims.
The Sims.
Yep.
Which is basically just broken Ukrainian, I think. But that's a language, right? When they get the plate stuck in front of them and they're like, that kind of thing.
Well, now we've got two emoticons and stuff like emojis. There we go. like language gets condensed into symbols. So it starts from symbols and it gets more complex, and now it seems to be getting more simple again. I think it's interesting.
Ooh, good call. Yeah.
Right?
It's sort of like cell phones, right? Cell phones started out really big, and then we wanted them to get really, really small, and now they're starting to get big again because
Huge.
people are consuming media in a different way.
Yeah.
Cell phones and language, they're the exact same. Side note, when my first trip to France, I took a great trip, and it was organized by some of the language teachers at North High. So like David Volk,
yep.
who's easily one of the best educators ever. I wish
yeah.
I had taken Latin from him. He's amazing.
That's what I should have done. I didn't take a language in high school, and I should have taken Latin from him.
Yeah,
I highly recommend it if people are able to.
I missed out on that big time. I should have done that.
You still
So-
can. It's just more. It's more work, but
Yeah,
you still can learn.
you're buying
Well, if
the
David Volk
Rosetta
starts
Stone.
teaching Klingon, I might consider it. I like my language to be useless.
There you go.
Well, Latin's pretty close. I mean, you're
But
going to
isn't
get
it-
to read and understand some stuff,
but
but
isn't
you're
it
not going to find a
also-
lot of people who can converse with you.
But isn't it also, though, I mean, if you have a solid Latin foundation, certain other languages are then easier because
Yes.
of that?
Without a doubt, yeah.
Romance languages in particular. Mhm.
So I'm not super interested in Romance languages. Just I think I like the sounds of Scottish and Irish speakers. I like the sounds of Latin when it is read off of the page like that. I like the sound of Japanese, but I'm just not that drawn to Romance languages for whatever reason.
Yeah. And well, dialects in itself is its own sect into linguistics, especially with the United States alone. We have how many dialects? Like people, the Midwest talk. Even in North Dakota, there are so many different dialects.
I
So
definitely
it's,
tell you're from Minot.
Yes. Can you?
Yeah.
I don't know what that means.
You've got Magic City mouth.
do I
I
talk-
can hear,
do
I
I
can
talk-
hear
do-
your Miz, or since
do I-
Minot's in the
Do
name.
I talk
Miz.
like a valley girl? Because
Well, then there's
Minot's
Northern
in a
Minot
valley.
and Southern
I'm a valley
Minot.
girl.
The people in South Minot,
South Minot.
they speak a little bit different than the Northerners.
But you're absolutely correct, and people don't give credit to the fact that every country has different regions and they change. So someone who lives in Nice is going to have a different tonality to their voice. They're going to emphasize different syllables versus somebody who lives in Paris. So same thing with Australia. I met 5 people recently from Australia, and they all, had what I would call an Australian accent, but it was apples and oranges different one to the
Totally.
next.
I when you say that, when I watched Hannah Gadsby's special on Netflix, I don't know if you guys have seen Annette yet, but
It's great,
she's
by the way.
Australian. It is. She's at first I thought she was British because that's where Australian language comes from. Is because when the British were there, that's where that started. But then as they left, that language has started to evolve. It's kind of like a twangy British, essentially, is what Australian is. But when I was watching that, she's from Tanzania, which I knew was from Australia, but I was like, that's a complete different sound than I'm used to from an Australian person. So
I went to Ireland in 2002. Spent most of the time on the West Coast, but then spent a little bit of time in the southern part of Ireland with a family. And one day we were watching a football match, and the announcer was from Northern Ireland. And the kids were like, he sounds so funny. He sounds so weird. And I was like, he sounds like you, dude. But I just wasn't used to it. But
Right.
they had grown up with it. They were used to that's a tiny island. You can drive from one side of Ireland to the other side in about a day if you really gun it. And even that distance, you're like, wow, that sounds weird.
on a road that's about 5 feet wide.
Oh, that was
I was there last
terrifying.
year. I've been to Ireland a couple times, and it's always terrifying being on those
There's
roads.
always
Oh.
trucks with 8 levels of hay bales on top.
And a sheep in the road.
Yeah, careening around the corner. But
Yes.
I want to go back really bad.
It's fantastic country.
I miss the smell of Ireland big time. The smell of peat moss being burnt in the countryside was fantastic.
So my family's primarily Scottish, and I've really loved my trips to Scotland. I have a great time there because it always smells like someone's cooking shepherd's pie. That's how the entire
best.
city of Edinburgh smells, and I loved it. I also love the fact that we're living in a world now where wherever you go, there is something that reminds you of home, or there are these universal truths. So, for example, when we were in Edinburgh, the most popular thing to do at a couple of these bars on like a Tuesday night, a non-weekend night, was to have karaoke. And I'm like, karaoke, huh? Like, I know that's not exclusive to the United States or Japan, but your bar is trying to get people to come in the same way that Rooters is.
Exactly.
Let's just throw some karaoke out there and people will get into it. The only difference is you're singing your karaoke in the basement of a castle that was built 2,000 years ago. That's the big difference that you're going to see there.
Exactly. That's always the fun thing to think about when you go to other countries. It's like, oh, very important things happened here, and now we're just taking selfies with it, you know?
Yeah.
One of our best podcasts is Monica's, and she talks about living
Episode
in Poland.
19.
Episode 19? Good.
We're getting to a numbers where I'm not going to be able to do that very
Yeah.
much longer.
Ooh, that's
Right
exciting.
now, I'm pretty much able to recall each number for each person, but she's episode 19.
We're talking about putting together a JJ Meets World Bible so that people can turn, we can turn to it and reference, be like, oh, yeah, that's right. We talked about this in episode 15. But she talks about living in Poland and living across the street from a very just, symbolic. It was important to the Polish people. It reminded them of another time. And it's only a chunk of a wall that's left of this building. And she says, then you got Americans going over there like, where's the camera?
The lady was like, why don't they just tear it down and build a new one?
Yeah.
And she was from Texas or something and didn't understand why you would want to preserve something old. Like, if it's not the Alamo, I don't know why you still have it.
And I think that's a common. I felt like I was apologizing for being an American anytime I was abroad.
I felt the same way.
I just felt just like, we're not all that way, I promise, because Americans we're
You don't got to apologize. You just got to drink with them. I think that's what you got to do.
Well, that's a universal thing too, for most countries, not all, obviously, but that's something that most people can sit down and enjoy a beer or a glass of wine. Can't do it. I miss doing that on a patio all year round.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really do that here, but still like that.
But in Minot, you could? Is that what you're saying?
No.
Sunny old Minot?
So-
No.
Let's talk real quick to go back to Minot.
Sure.
So Minot was devastated. Was in 2009, the flood of 2009?
2011.
2011. And it wiped a huge chunk of the city off of the map.
It did, yes.
Was your family affected by that?
Fortunately, no, because Minot there's North Hill, and then there's South Hill, and then there's the valley, which is where the river was. So it's still there, where the river is. So basically, like filled up like a fishbowl. The valley did. And I was over on the North Hill at the time. That's where my family lived. So we weren't directly affected. We didn't have to evacuate at all. But at the time, North Hill didn't even really have a grocery store. So the only way everything's in South Minot. The grocery stores, the mall, all restaurants, all of these things. And so we kind of felt trapped a little bit because we knew a little bit ahead of time, but it was flooded for a while. We don't have a grocery store here. The only way to get to South Minot was through the bypass, which was a 7-hour wait every day with all this traffic for people trying to get to and from work. So now North Hill has been developing more. I think it was a huge wake-up call for them to say, hey, we should probably put a grocery store on the north side of town so people can get food, whenever
There's
they
apparently
can.
a bunch of people up there that could be serviced by a grocery store.
Exactly. Not that there weren't any, but there wasn't any main grocery store for a bunch of people to be able to go in a time like that where you needed to get a lot of supplies. So yeah, I graduated. It was the summer after I graduated high school. It was 2011. So
Ooh, that's gotta be scary, huh?
yeah, it was. And I kept trying. You're 18. I kept trying to be grateful. Like, hey, your home isn't being literally flooded right now. You don't have to evacuate. A lot of people did, and the town is still recuperating. It's come very far. I don't go back as much anymore, as most of my family lives here now. I have a sister that still lives in Minot, but she usually comes this way. But it's come a long way, but it takes a while to recuperate. Grand Forks is still recuperating from their flood in 97, was
Yeah.
it?
By the way, Grand Forks, you are crushing it these days. They're doing a really when their town was devastated by both a flood and a fire that took place during the flood, which is really a double kick to the pants.
It is.
They've embraced the fact that, you know what, we're going to rebuild. It's going to be better than it was before. We're going to improve some of the, not mistakes, but mishaps.
Yep.
One nice story that I heard recently out of Minot is that after the flood and people lost their homes or they needed to rebuild half of the home, there was this call for people who do tile work and people who do electrical work. And there wasn't enough people just in the community of Minot to rebuild all these homes that need to be built. And so folks from all over the country did their apprenticeship and their journeyman activity out there. And so there is a bustling number of young, skilled tradespeople here who, because of a disaster, were able to actually get their foot in the door and start their own company or work under somebody who had an established company. And so I find that to be amazing. It's a horrible thing that happened in Minot, but it's maybe the silver lining of one of those situations.
Kind of sort of those blessings in disguise, if you want to throw out all these cliches to describe it, right? That's essentially, I think, what happens with any tragedy or any natural disaster like that.
Fire clears out part of a forest. That part of the
cleansing.
forest is going to grow again.
Yeah.
Then it's going to be renewed.
Exactly.
What's the scariest thing you think you've ever done? So most
This
people,
podcast.
I was going to say the number one fear people have is
Speaking in public.
public speaking.
Oh, I'm
second-
not too scared of that.
Right. So I'm curious to know, because the second greatest fear of people have is death. Jerry Seinfeld put it a great way. He goes, the number one fear is public speaking. Number two is death. So you'd rather be in the coffin than giving the eulogy. But so I find that people who have the gift of public speaking, so what's the thing that scares you instead?
Well, besides just overall failure in general.
Oh, yeah, failure?
Failure.
Did you go to TEDx Fargo by any chance?
I went last year. I was gone. I was in Jamaica last week, so I wasn't able to go.
Jamaica last week.
Yes. So I did not attend TEDx, but I'd say that, are we just talking overall fears in
Go
general?
for it.
I mean, failure is one of them. I've been a type A personality my whole life. It's been a lot of, just making sure that I don't screw up my life, essentially, has been a big fear of mine. But also, I have an irrational fear of snakes, which is a pretty common one. It's not like how people are scared of spiders. I am not scared of spiders at all. I'll pick them up and I'll take them outside. With snakes, I respect that they're there. Just don't come near me or slither in front of me unexpectedly. I had a lot of your fears stem from experiences you have as a kid, and I had a bad experience with snakes. So I just, even talking about it makes me all.
I mean, I don't want to put you uncomfortable. What happened with you and a snake?
Well, it's just how can you move without legs? Why? How in the HELL does an animal move without legs? I am not interested in that. Nope.
Have you ever? So I don't like snakes either. My irrational fear is a snake in a public toilet. So, and the idea that you get bit and you go oh my God, there's a snake in here.
Someone figured out the thumbnail for this episode.
I'm tearing up in my eyes just from thinking of that.
It's awful, isn't it? And so now people send me stories all the time about python pulled out of the pipes in Taiwan hotel. And I go, oh my God, this is awful. This is the worst thing ever. But what freaks me out the most about snakes is when you watch a snake transition from land into water and it doesn't slow them down at all. It just it almost gets faster. Yeah, I don't care for that.
That's
What about eels?
I'm no
Like
opinion.
a moray eel?
No
I guess
opinion,
it's not on
really.
the ground. It's only in the water. And
They're
that makes
tasty.
sense.
They taste good.
Sure.
I like eating eel, but other than that, I'm not in a climate where I can encounter eel very often. So I guess I don't have.
You're in a great
concrete
climate
opinion.
for snakes because
Exactly.
we have very, very few snakes when it really boils down to it, especially on this side of the state.
Right. Exactly. And there's more on the west side of the state where I'm from. But yeah, that's my irrational fear for, they're just animals. They're just doing their thing, which I'm I don't want to kill them. I don't want them to be killed unless they need to be, if someone's put in danger or whatever. But I just don't be near me or anywhere in my
Down in Foreman, North Dakota right now, there's a woman who said, listen, I've got a 7-foot python in my house and I haven't seen it in a week. I think it may have gotten outside. So now the whole town is on red alert because there's a potential that there's a 7-foot python slithering
how can
around
you
the town.
miss that? I'm sorry.
Well, and she let it roam around the house.
Was it a pet? Because that's a huge, huge issue, especially in the Everglades of these snakes getting out. And now they're effing crap up down there
Yeah.
of the ecosystem. It's throwing everything off.
Now, luckily, I don't believe that they could survive the winter up here.
Right.
But it was 90 degrees last week, and so that snake was probably in hog heaven. It was humid. It was just like its natural environment. But here's the thing, like, when it gets to be cold, that's when you got to really worry because they'll slither up inside your engine and of like hold on to like an engine. Yeah. So next time your check engine light comes on, it could be a snake.
Oh, that's the conclusion we're calling it.
That's how my mind works, Chelsey. I go be like, oh, engine's not working. Probably a snake or a gremlin, one or the other.
To recap, my main fears are failure and snakes. I feel like those are boring fears though.
Well, I also can't imagine you're someone who's known a lot of failure. You don't seem like someone who's failed a lot.
Because I'm afraid of it, I try to avoid it at all costs. But I mean, that's how you grow as a person too. I realize that I can't do everything perfect. I'm a huge perfectionist, and especially now in the working world. Now that I'm out of college, I had a 4.0 GPA at NDSU. I had a 4.0 in high school because I think it comes down to that's a way of me being able to quantify my self-worth. And now I think a lot of people, when they graduate college, have to completely unlearn all of these 18 years of life of being like, this is how you're going to quantify your self-worth with this. And if that's all you have, then that's all you really know. And so now when you're in the working world, it's like, am I even doing things right? I haven't been chastised for anything, so I think I'm doing okay, It's like that episode of Parks and Rec where Andy's like, I don't have no idea what I'm doing, but I know I'm doing it really well. And I feel like that's just adulthood and the working world in general. So
it really, I mean, there's absolute truth there, right? And I look at kids who are in their like sophomore year of college and they're like, well, I've got to do this and I've got to do this. And I think, do you gotta do that?
Exactly.
And I find that most businesses, have you ever interviewed someone for a job?
Conducted the interview.
With some interns, yes.
So I've done it several times for billion-dollar companies, and they'll bring a transcript, and I don't even look at it. I don't even really care.
No one cares. No one cares
It's
about
amazing.
transcripts. Yes, and that's a lot of like with scholarships, you have to show transcripts and things like that. But I've never brought a transcript to a job interview. Granted, I haven't had a whole lot in my life, but I've never thought of that. That's interesting to hear that people would bring a transcript.
Oh, and someone brought their diploma with once too, and it was more or less not
kind of cute, actually.
It's like that's why I'm like, oh,
because it's not to prove to me that you've got it. It
I brought this painting I made yesterday.
Please tell me I'm worthy of being on the earth.
I made these shoes. They're great. Did you ever go to summer camp?
I never went to summer camp, and it's something that I think is a void in my life.
Yeah,
I hear it's great, but no, I never went.
I went to one weekend of summer camp, and I remember having a wonderful time, and I wonder why I never went back. Because now I'm really itching for that experience of, like, wouldn't that be fun to, like, I was trying to plan my wedding so we'd rent out a summer camp and be like, so everyone could sleep in the bunks and we'll go to the mess hall.
I think that's why I did video production at Trolloyd in the summer, because that was summer camp for
like
indoor
camp.
kids.
Yeah.
Doing the video production class, like, oh, we're going to go sit in a computer bay? Sweet.
Nice. Air conditioning.
Oh, yes.
There's
There's a soda dispenser?
If you were going to give a piece of advice to somebody today who wanted to get into your field of communications,
Yes.
what's some real world advice that would be worth its weight in gold that maybe they're not hearing?
Totally. Well, you have to learn how to write. First of all, in communications particularly, you have to know how to put a sentence together. You'd be surprised at how many people still don't like capitalize words, and I feel like that's partially because we're in a texting world now. It's like, no, you still have to follow some rules. I'm a rule follower, which no one's surprised by.
I just installed Grammarly.
Did you?
Yesterday.
It's something that I'm very
I love it.
picky about, is knowing, because I mean, English, like we've talked about before, is a very tough language. So it's hard to keep track of all these rules, but some things you gotta know how to do. You have to know how to write, and write for a variety of channels. Writing for a blog is very different than writing for a newspaper.
Yeah.
So you just have to know those different things. And it's a lot of, I think you also need to continue and have an attitude of gratitude. I think that that's something that will always be something that will help you in your path towards success, whatever that may be. Everyone has a different definition for success, if you will. So that's something that I think is to just always be humble with what you do and realize that when you do get some feedback or some criticism, take that in and take that to heart and actually apply it, because some people are, myself included, I get nervous about hearing criticism, but I am always grateful anytime I do, because I do take that to heart. That's something that I always tell especially new college students or people still in college. That's something that you always need to keep in mind. Also, it's all kind of boring stuff and things that people know, but internships are very important, especially in this community. A lot of it is you have to know people in order to get certain opportunities, which is the case for everywhere. But just put yourself out there. That's another cliche, but that is something that I also recommend is to be confident. That's something that I think is super important too, is to show your confidence and at least try and also be self-aware. Self-awareness is something that I think also takes people very far, and to recognize hey, I may not be doing this very well. How can I fix this? So that's kind of overall advice.
It's good. It's good advice though, because sometimes people don't want to accept the fact that oh, well, I don't know anybody, so I probably won't get, I won't get anywhere.
It's not
That's
that.
not it, but it definitely gives you a leg up.
It does.
And you can meet people by putting yourself out there.
Yeah, there are a whole bunch of networking events in the area that are free to go to, and you may feel very awkward, but those moments where you feel super uncomfortable are where you're going to grow. So you have to do that. I had to get used to that as well. My very first year working for the Arts Partnership, I was super shy. I was scared to even post on social media for the Arts Partnership. Now I'm like, oh yeah, here you go, whatever is happening. So you just need to, as my colleagues have lovingly put it, get over it. Just do it. Just get over it. Get over that feeling you have about, oh, I don't want to mess it up. But to go back to self-awareness, some people, if you're interacting with someone who probably is pretty important, you should still keep that mode of professionalism about you and say, oh, I should just stay in check with what I'm saying and how I'm presenting myself, but still be myself. Be your best self,
Do you read a lot?
I do. I haven't been reading in terms of books, I haven't been reading as many books lately. I have a goal to read one professional book per month until May. But in my job, I'm looking at words all day. I'm writing all day.
Yeah.
So when I get and researching on the web, I read a lot of articles and things like that. But when I get home, I'm like, I don't want to look at another damn word.
Yeah.
I'm so exhausted from looking at words all day because a lot of my job is writing. So, but I do read.
I've heard it said before that if you want to get good at reading is necessary. You have to be reading a lot.
To say the word that I've been saying a lot, I say absolutely a lot. Sorry, guys.
It's fine.
Absolutely is. You have to read in order to know how to write.
What's a book that I'm sorry.
You go.
Yeah, are you sure? You want me to go?
No,
Are you sure you don't want to go?
I'll go.
Okay.
How much? Welcome to Tucker Meets World. How much of becoming better at writing is listening and the art of conversation?
Huge. It's hard to quantify, but I know it's very important to use a word that very is a lazy word. I know, but it's so important to read and to listen and to take things in order to be a good writer. In terms of writing, like what I'm doing now, by the time this comes out, I'll have an article out about you. I don't know how good that will be. I'm hoping it's good. You guys are hopefully read it by now when this comes out, right? But I observe. I take notes in my head, like kind of feel the room. Okay, sort of. How can I articulate and capture these people in writing? That's more than just spouting out all the quotes they said and the observations I made. How can I tell the why? That's always what I'm trying to do with any of the work I'm doing is why should anybody care? Why does this matter? Why is this important?
When you're describing JJ and I, feel free to just type out sound effects. Yep.
Yep. Bam. So let's take this thing full circle to the very
Sure.
beginning. That's my turn of phrase that I like. That is cliche. Let's go full circle.
That's
on
what I
this.
did too. I like to do that as well.
So we'll just throw that in there. So we had never met you before. I've said hello to you before.
I've
but
said
that's
hello to you
about
as well.
The extent of it.
Yes.
Before you sat down at this table, you got a chance to interview us. We got a chance to interview you. To somebody who may be a future guest on this podcast, what is this experience like? Which I imagine is going to be part of your article. So let's get a little preview of that.
Sure.
Of
It's
that
okay to go
experience.
negative. It's okay to go negative.
No,
We did not provide you with a beverage. I regret that.
That's all right. They didn't bring me my drink order. I asked for Pepsi, and he still didn't bring it to me.
She kept shaking a glass of ice at me. I don't even know where she got the ice.
She's upset this globe on the table isn't geologically correct.
No, I this has been so much fun because a lot of what I do is just having conversations with people and storytelling, and that's what you guys are doing too. So we have that value alignment with this, and it's super fun to chat with you guys, and it's something that I personally have an interest in, but also from my arts background, this is an art in itself. Being able to podcast is an art in itself. So it's a great experience. 10 out of 10. Would recommend. 100% emoji. There you go. That's
from
what
Minot.
Do I talk like a valley girl? Like Red River Valley? Not Red River Valley, like the valley in Minot that
So-
flooded.
Chelsey Ewen, I imagine your worst nightmare is showing up to class, finding out that everyone else got an A, but you got a B, and the class is on dirt taught by a snake. That's got to be your worst nightmare ever.
If a snake gives me a B, I don't care. I do not care. I probably wouldn't go to that class. Give me an F. I don't care. I don't want to see you because I don't like snakes.
If someone just shaped some dirt to look like a snake, would you be conflicted?
I don't even know how to answer
See,
that.
these are the kind of questions
Yeah.
they don't ask at the forum.
It's
Yeah.
true.
What
It's
about a
true.
snake that's sealed in ember, like it from Jurassic Park?
Like the mosquito?
Yeah, but it's a
Or-
lot of ember.
See, that's dead. So whatever.
That's why I want a John Lamb article to go. Do you ever think that someone might think cardboard tastes good? Be like, I'm the governor. Why are you asking me that question? Well, I've always wanted to ask you.
You know,
that.
timeliness and relevancy is important with a news article, which brings my point back to what you're writing about. It depends on the channel you're writing for. But with podcasting, there's a lot more fun you can have with it. So it's been really fun.
Good. I'm glad. If people want to read what you're writing, if they want to find you in
Sure.
the digital verse, how are they going to do that?
Absolutely. So I write for the Fargo Forum. I have an article in the life section in the paper every Monday, other than when Dana has a column. That's kind of my off week. But every month, whether it's 3 or 4 Mondays of the month, I have an article in the life section. Also, usually those are in the entertainment section online. Depends on the story. Some are in the life, some are in the entertainment. I also, if you go to the Arts Partnership website, you'll see my blog. All the content is there. And that's in terms of writing. Also, follow the Arts Partnership on Facebook, on Twitter. We're kind of on Instagram. We're not on Snapchat, sorry, or Pinterest. Sorry, we don't have those channels
What
really.
about Zanga? You still have a GeoCities page.
No.
Remember, our age differences are great. That would have been when she was like
She
in 8th
remembers
grade.
angelfire.com, I bet.
No.
/ND/biz2.
I had a Pixo website.
I don't even know
I
what
made a
that is.
Pixo website when I was in like 8th grade.
Hmm.
Do you guys
What was
remember
what was
that?
the basis of it? Why aren't people learning languages?
No, I wasn't quite that sophisticated as an 8th grader, honestly. No, I think I remember my password was boys suck. I literally
I think that's the title
That
of
might
the
be the
episode.
title of the episode.
No.
Yeah.
No, please no.
Quote Chelsey Ewen, boys suck. Password.
It was all one password.
That's my bank password. Don't let that out right
No,
now.
that's my password to everything. No, it's not.
Yeah, you know that's all right because my my first handle on AOL Instant Messenger was that. Did you have nope? Never mind. It was like
I had MSN. I did MSN Messenger. Yes.
as a Minot thing because it had an M at the front. Everything with M's at the front is the Minot equivalent.
If you
Really?
didn't start with Yahoo Messenger, I don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But mine
I'm
was
sorry.
Old Spice 26.
No.
Mine was Ben
Yeah.
Folds 5 always.
Yep.
fortunately, I had a mother who had some foresight, and I've had the same Hotmail address that I've had since I created a Hotmail address. It's just Chelsey E930. My name, my last initial, and my birthday. And she's like, you don't need Surfer Girl 258 or any of that stuff, which is fine if that's what you use. But she's like, just do your name. I'm like, okay, that's boring, but whatever. Talking like a ballet. I know.
That's good.
I actually just signed up for a Gmail account like a couple months ago. So I've been using a Hotmail account.
Are you just going to forward your Hotmail?
When were you born? Because I think my mom uses Hotmail or something. I don't know.
Well, it's technically like MSN or Outlook or whatever it is. I was born in 1992.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I was born.
When were you guys born?
1983.
1983.
85.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So
that's not
happened.
that big of a difference, actually.
just kidding.
I mean, it's weird. It's actually weird to be at a point now where we're like, oh, I remember the good old days of the internet. I bet you kids don't even know what Netscape is.
Netscape Navigator. I love it.
I'm kind of right on that cusp of people of the kind of nostalgic generation, if you will, that remembers that it's fascinating to me that there are entire people on this earth that will never ever know what it's like to not have the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating. I remember being 5 years old and my parents brought this big Apple computer that the monitor was gigantic. It was just the size of this room, which
got
you can't
really hot too.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But you just learn it, and there are 2-year-olds now that just know how to use an iPod. It's fascinating.
I actually miss the sound of the modem connecting because that meant the internet was coming into your house now. It's time for internet. And if you're trying to do it in the middle of the night, you try to muffle the sound of it so your parents don't hear you connecting. And
Shh, quiet modem.
Get off the phone. Get off the internet. I need to use the phone.
Like,
That was
5 more
common.
minutes and I'll have this picture of Gillian Anderson, and then mom picks up the phone to call grandma and you lose the connection.
Oh gosh.
Oh,
Good
those are
old
the
days,
glory
man.
Good old days of the internet.
You
That
kids today will
dial-up.
never know the 28K days.
That reminds me the joke that the comedian Eliza Schessler, gather around the Snapchat children, let me tell you the tale of the landline. Like that's our generation. That's what we're gonna talk about when we're old. So it's pretty funny.
Yeah, sometimes people pretend they're older than they really are. Like, oh, well, back in my day, you mean like 1996? That's not back in the
I
day.
know. Sometimes I feel like that when I'm like, oh, I'm 1992, whatever. But I can't age any faster. I can't help when I was born. None of us can help when we were born. But it's always just super interesting.
I can't help loving cribbage. So
I
am
love
an
cribbage.
man.
I love cribbage.
And we're out of time. Why didn't we get into this? Oh, next time we'll have a
Our
whole
audience
cribbage.
has really been demanding an all cribbage episode.
Again, that guy just turned it up even louder. Like, dirt and cribbage? Podcast is everything.
Dirt and cribbage and snakes. And also boys suck. So that's basically wraps up the show right
Yeah,
now.
this is great. Chelsey Ewen, thank you so much for joining us on
Thank
JJ
you.
Meets World.
This has been a riot. Thank you.
And read Chelsea's article and then all of her blog posts and stuff. And you can also listen to her on kfgo.com, Nighttimes Live with Bob Harris. She's got a piece there every week with him,
Yes,
too.
the Metro Art Scene every Wednesday, depending if the Twins play, then sometimes it's Thursday, but
But it always
usually
gets
Wednesday.
podcast.
It
Always
does.
gets podcast.
Always gets podcasted. Yes.
Sweet. Well, thanks.
Thank you so much.
JJ Meets World.
Well, folks, that does it for this episode of JJ Meets World. Special thanks to our guest, Chelsey Ewen. And, folks, we have a big ask. We know a lot of you are listening because you may have just heard about JJ Meets World. And it costs us some money to get this thing up and running. We love doing it, but the bills are starting to pile up. If you would go to patreon.com/JJMeetsWorld and donate a couple of bucks, it's really going to help us keep this podcast growing and get bigger and bigger and bigger. We're asking for the price of a cup of coffee. We're asking you to give up getting an extra burger at McDonald's and just give that money to us. And we promise we will have it hot and fresh any way that you like it. Tucker will be delivering the burgers himself at one point. I don't know when, but it's going to happen. If you also go to jjmeetsworld.com, you can find old episodes there. You can also find a link to our Patreon account through that. We have made it pretty easy for you to give us some of your hard-earned money. And these are hard-earned podcasts, so it's really just an eye for an eye at this point. More episodes coming up. You're never going to want to run out of these things, so go to iTunes, subscribe to us on iTunes, and then subscribe to us on Google Play, and then subscribe to us on Spotify. We're wherever you consume the podcast that you love. You can also find my producer, Tucker Lucas, at his website, which is moonbasemaria.com. You can find direct contact for me, your host with the most, at linebenders.com. And again, patreon.com/JJMeetsWorld. A couple of dollars goes a long way. I need to borrow some money, but I need you to not ask why. And then I need to not pay you back right away. So I'm going to put your thumb up and you tell me when it's too much. 7, 9, 15. Okay, 9, 10. $9 it is. Thanks.